So you know, when I walked in this building today in the morning, it was such a fun experience because I ended up walking because I didn't, it's a long story, I had to be somewhere else yesterday. And so I'm walking in and then I go around the corner and I follow the people with badges. This is what you do when you're going to a conference, right? For the second day. I just follow people with badges. And I ended up in the corner of this building at another conference. And they had white badges, which I didn't pay attention to that. So I ended up there, and I go all the way up, and it says registration, so I go and register, and I wait in the queue. And then I'm there at the point, and I give up my luggage and all the stuff, like all the bags that I had. And then they kind of let me in somehow. It was like names. They're not a big conference. Okay, whatever. So I'm kind of walking in, and then I realize people talk about interesting and unusual things. Because it was a conference for veterinary, and they talk about pets and things like that. And I thought, that's a clue that it's probably a slightly different conference. So it's almost a happy moment for me that I ended up here. So thank you so much for coming as well. Now, like smart responsive design patterns, right? So when I look at you now, even people who I can't see all the way in the back, you know a thing or two about design and responsive and design patterns and all this stuff. It's not very surprising for us to hear this title. It's like, what new could be there? And I think there are a few things that are actually quite difficult once you really start looking at them at the microscopic level, right? So what I want to do with us today is kind of dive into all those little microscopic details. And I have to warn you from the very start, the things you're going to see, you might not be able to unsee, ever. And I don't take any responsibility of what's going to happen next once you've seen them, right? This is very important, and you think I'm joking, actually I'm not. We'll get to that in a second. Now, there are many things floating around on the web today. Like one of the things that many people are speaking about is this lack of interest, lack of creativity, lack of inspiration, lack of many things actually, right? And it kind of boils down to the fact that when we observe the websites, we don't really explore the personality of people behind them. We don't really think about the personalities of websites anymore. It's more like we consume websites in a slightly different way of seeing it. And there is a reason for it, not because we don't know how to design better. Of course we do. The problem is, it's really hard to design something that's groundbreaking and new and interesting and shiny. And so every time I run projects as a consultant, as part of our consultancy, I have these conversations with managers who tend to see creative process, be it a design process, or be it front-end development process, be it selection of a framework or anything in between. They see it as a very kind of straightforward, linear, iterative process. When you start somewhere, does it work? Yes. When you start somewhere, and it works over there, I tried so hard. When you start somewhere and you go and you iterate and improve and refine and make things better, and over time, eventually, you hit this finish line where things are done. Now, in reality, of course, this is not quite what the creative process looks like. Because to me, and probably to many of you, this looks much more like this, where you start somewhere and you just keep exploring and you diverge and you try to find out what the right path would be. Maybe it's a selection of a framework, maybe it's a selection of a technique, maybe it's a design style, maybe it's kind of a visual direction you want to take. And the problem is every time we end up exploring, eventually we also will hit a dead end. And this is the point where we're losing time, and nobody really likes losing time. And this is why we kind of end up in situations like this. Right? Many of you might have seen this tweet by John Galt a while back. Which one of these two possible websites are you currently designing? The one on the left or the one on the right? Because there is nothing else. That's it. Oh, okay, the difference could be the position of a carousel, which could be at the top or at the bottom, or maybe both at the top and the bottom, because why not? Right? And I think that we're getting lost in this ocean and refinements and ongoing refinements with our little A/B testing tools. We're looking very much in this local picture, trying to understand what we do right, what we do wrong, and improving and refining, while at the same time, maybe losing the big picture as well. And if we just look at the iteration of the Photoshop toolbar over the last 30 years, 30 years is a huge span of time. right? And we could say that the Photoshop toolbar hasn't changed much, right? But maybe the decision that somebody made, let's say 30 years ago, might need to be revised given the very different context in which we're designing today, right? But we learned from big companies that it's actually the way forward. And so we know from Facebook that go ahead and iterate and improve and refine every single day, right? We would see 20 or 30 running tests. How many of you had this conversation with your designers at some point? Border radius, 11 pixels or 12? Or maybe, 1 month later, after an extensive research, 13. And I'm wondering at this point, does it really matter if it's 12 or 13 or 11 or 14 or 15? We've been taught that it's actually a really important thing, and of course it is. We want to improve conversion, we want to refine things, we want to improve things. But if we look just at that, a little bit of more blue, a little bit less blue. 1 pixel to the left and 1 pixel to the right. And I feel like in many ways when we're doing that, while optimizing for this local scope in which we're designing, kind of tend to forget the big picture, because if you redesign something entirely and create a very different version, you might end up with much better conversion in the end. Right, but we kind of get stuck in this A/B testing, which is why when we run tests, we always do two kinds of tests, A/B test and a Z test. And a Z would be a very different version which has nothing to do with the baseline, right? But when we look and think about creating these memorable experiences that have a personality, if I ask you, how often do you actually encounter a website that's memorable? Can you think of a website today, as of now, that you saw maybe over the last couple of months or so, that was so memorable that you still have it in your head right now? Or should websites be just, serve the purpose and be totally invisible? Now, I remember one. This was one where I thought, wow, that's a freaking website, right? And this is a homage to that art. And when I see this, and I think this is quite memorable, this is quite remarkable, this is quite powerful, in many ways very kind of impactful, right? But I also have to think about how much time, how many people, how many resources, how much money had to be invested to make this happen. This is not something you can pull off on a Sunday night, right? This is probably going to require quite a significant team effort, and of course all of this has to be responsive and accessible and performant and all the wonderful things that we know of, right? This is a very kind of fundamentally difficult problem to solve, especially on a tight budget. Here's another one. And that's quite memorable as well, where you see a really fully embracing interactive experience. The boat, storytelling, a comic book experience, beautifully done by our colleagues from Australia at SBS. And again, this is not easy to do. This would take a lot of effort to make it work. And it's really nice kind of integration of audio and video and everything in between. And as you keep scrolling down, all of a sudden, you have all these moving parts that kind of react to the story. It's incredibly empowering, right? And I'm really happy to see this stuff on the web today. But I also see how difficult it actually to produce something like this within on a tight budget. And so I was wondering for quite some time, how can we make things more memorable, right? Without breaking the web, or without making things too generic. And I think I tried very hard to think how I can maybe create more kind of less impact like Uber and more impact that companies that actually make greater difference with their striking personality. Because I asked myself for a while, per se, I'm not here to judge if Uber is a good company or not, a bad company, but if I look at the interface, nothing kind of really drags me into that interface. So if there was another company it's kind of providing the same service, but maybe 10, 15 cents cheaper on average, I would jump right away. Because I don't have any loyalty to Uber at all. But it makes it so hard for me to move away from MailChimp. It's so hard. Why is it so hard? And it's probably not the monkey, I don't think it's a monkey. But for me, it's the fact that the company and the product really represents the values that people working at the company have. And I know many of them, and they're a very family-friendly company. They create these color books like this. Like, there is no button anywhere saying MailChimp is the best company in the world because it's email. Who cares about email? Okay, I mean, emails are important. Sorry, don't get me wrong. But at the same point, email company, so what can be exciting about it? But they create these beautiful artifacts, and they say they use copy and microcopy and writing. It's just so powerful. Like, hi, I'm Freddy. It's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you? Now, how can you answer it in a negative way? Like, I'm no fun at all. Like every day I wake up, I think I'm such a boring person, I don't want to go anywhere, right? No, of course not. And so it keeps going and going and going. And in the end, also the same thing, I love being me. Do you love being you? You don't wake up in the morning thinking, I hate myself today. This is probably, or hopefully, not how it works. And I think that the reason why I actually stick with MailChimp, although it's not a cheap product or cheap service to use, is because of this little animation. This animation that captures the emotion you have when you're just about to send that email campaign to 200,000 people, right? And this is maybe, this animation alone might be the reason why I actually stick around with MailChimp for more than 7 years now, right? And we actually had Kenneth speaking about friction, speaking about making people think or not making people think. I think that if we do want to kind of have this opportunity to connect with people on an emotional level, we kind of need to introduce a little bit of friction, but not at the cost of accessibility and usability, of course. We can break things for the sake of breaking them, and this will look a little bit too strange, and if it's a bit too weird, please close your eyes now. This is not what I'm talking about when we create or add friction. That's just friction without anything else, really. Right? This is just too much. And this is just a part of it. Because if you scroll back up, it gets all mad. Right? But at the same point, this is not the friction we need to create. Right? We can create a bit of friction. You might think this interface is a bit unusual, I would say. And apparently marquee, like running text, is a hipster thing in web development at this point. So pretty much everybody will have it. And this navigation looks a little bit weird, or a little bit off. Especially on this screen, so huge. Like, think about so huge, right? But when we were running tests on this particular site, while this might feel a bit awkward to some of us, many users actually loved this interface. They loved it. Buttons are huge, it's all fully accessible, you can click anywhere, the hit targets are huge. That's wonderful, right? So this is kind of one of the better experiences they had. The same thing, at the same time, we kind of tend to try to hide navigation at some point. Like, why do we provide these navigation options if we can put them behind the hamburger icon? And here, this particular case, we're displaying the navigation because it kind of fits in within the rest of the story that we're telling, and the style that they provide kind of fit in as well. And I always tend to kind of look into this perspective, look into this design decisions from the perspective of Tijuana Flats, which is a really good example of how you can really bring in your personality to life. Now, Tijuana Flats is a chain of restaurants in the US, and this is what they look like. This might not be your style, and that's perfectly fine, right? But these are really tall ceilings, really huge, huge, huge walls. And these are the people coming to the restaurant. If you can see, like all the way to the bottom here, right? And these are really, really tall ceilings. And every 4 months or so, they would hire professional graffiti artists to come in and paint and help continue the story that they started a while back, right? And it's fascinating because, of course, that story or this personality has to be reflected in the menu. And so it is. This is the menu. But of course, I would argue it should be reflected in the website, and this is the website, right? And you can think for a second of how you would make it responsive. I'm just saying. And you think that this is it. Well, if you actually scroll down, there is a whole thing happening, right? This is not an easy thing to build, but I would argue that it nicely captures the personality that they actually had on all the other assets that they provide, right? And they had a couple of designs like this. One of them was this, which is a previous version of the same site. From 2014 though, right? So you come to the site and this is what you can do. You have your vending machine and have a fancy carousel in the middle, right? It's beautiful. Like, how often do you see something like that? Okay, every single day, but still, that's pretty cool. And then you have a joystick that does nothing, but why not? Then you have the social media button, donation box. And you look at the donation box, like, okay, donation box. And then the best part is you can switch off the entire machine because why not? And then it switches off. Okay, how often do you see that? Probably never. You can turn it back up, right? And then it all reboots and it starts again. And you can also turn off the lights in the back. How often can you turn off the lights on the website these days? I mean, you can have a dark mode, of course, but this is what I'm talking about, right? And then you go to the smaller screen, and we tend to kind of get used to this idea that we have to repackage. We have to make layout smaller. We have to make font size smaller to fit in. But maybe we should not fit in, because this is exactly what I was talking about in the beginning. But instead kind of reinvent or rethink what we could provide, right? If you go even smaller, Right? And it just perfectly maps with maybe the expectation that some people have. And yes, it's very different design and different screens, but there is nothing wrong about that, right? Now, in the spirit of everything we know about performance, accessibility, design, and all of this stuff, I mean, web fonts and textures being expensive, they moved away from this design to this design. And that's it, right? And I think there's a lot lost between the previous one and this one. Well, previous one really has a very striking personality. And no company knows it better than Blumberg, that comes up and keeps inventing these interfaces which are really different in many ways. Essentially trying to break the rules a little bit for the sake of breaking the rules at times, but also to, I guess, to raise awareness, or also to kind of basically just to bring people to the site, of course, right? And this probably, again, goes pretty much against everything we know. And when was the last time you used the marquee tag? Please don't, right? But at the same time, it kind of feels different. And so they hired a bunch of designers who were given the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And guess what? They did whatever they wanted, including this incredible feature on Elon Musk, which is really, really hard to forget. It really is, right? And so at this point, yes, we're adding friction, and maybe this is a little bit too much friction, right? Where we're kind of making things different, or breaking the rules just for the sake of breaking the rules to bring people in, right? And if you think about the calendar pattern, now that's a calendar. That's probably not the most accessible one, right? But that's a calendar that they're kind of playing with, and that's worth for them. Right? And of course you can go ahead and you don't have to break things, because you can do, of course, things like this, which is just inaccessible and difficult to use. And I hope you appreciate the cursor hover effect. That's a little bit disrespectful, maybe, right? But this idea of maybe moving things around, dragging things around, things like that, that might be actually applied in a very different, subtle, friendly, kind of gentle and respectful manner, right? Choose your own adventure. Put the heading at the top, put the heading at the bottom. Nobody stops you from doing that, right? It's a slightly different way of adding a little bit of friction while embedding personality in it. But of course, it's not the only thing. The other thing you can do is to really take something that's really boring, inherently boring, and flip it upside down and make it a bit more interesting. And a great example for that, of course, is the Hans Brinker Hotel in Amsterdam, which is apparently not a really good hotel. I mean, at all. So if you're not a good hotel, you should not be expecting 4 or 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor, which they did not get. But the problem was they were not selling enough rooms. So the idea was, okay, how can we make it better? Well, there are options, obviously. Well, you can make things better by investing money, but there was no money to be invested. Or you can make things more interesting by actually making the experience worse. And so what if instead of selling the best hotel experience in the world, you sell the worst hotel experience in the world, right? And it worked fairly well for them, because apparently they're expanding to Lisbon now, and it's really hard to get the room because everybody wants to experience the worst hotel experience in the world, right? And so even if you think about things like, I don't know, social media buttons, we have these conversations, adding a Facebook-like button or not, right? And maybe this is not so important, because at this point there are only 2 options: not use, or embed it in the story somehow. And so if you really want to make people to like you, make it very, very clear that you want them to like you, right? Just as clear as you possibly can. You don't have to stop with 1 like buttons. It could also be just an image containing all the like buttons so you don't load the Facebook script. That could be even better, right? What about pop-ups? Like boring pop-ups. Who likes a pop? Anybody likes pop-ups? 1 person who is okay to admit it. It's a safe place, that's okay. If you like pop-up, that's perfectly fine. I love pop-ups, I really do. This is the best pop-up in the world. I wish every single website had it. It's so annoying, it's wonderful. I love every single bit of it. Right? And it's really, really difficult to close, but at the same point, it kind of fits in within the story that they're telling. So in that way, it works, right? Here's another one, age prompt. You want to buy a bottle of beer, for example, for a friend, and you're greeted with this wonderful prompt like, hey, how old are you? That's not friendly. I don't want to go to a friend and ask like, hey, how old are you? But in some websites you can type in any date, maybe even the 32nd date of the 43rd month of 1547, and you will still enter the site because most people lie, so we can make it easier for them to lie, right? But we can also make things a bit more interesting. So here in Austin Beer Works, and these things are really cheap to do. It's not like the first examples that I showed that are extremely complicated and advanced. Here, depending on how you answer, the different pop-up shows up, right? Pop-ups are cheap, everybody can do that. And kind of tells and becomes the story. Choose your own adventure. What would you like to be, right? And it just keeps going and going, and at some point, you really don't want to click yes, and then you will come back and maybe click again and open an incognito window just to see what other reactions you will get from that interface, right? Excuse me the language here at this point, please. There is no option to click it away though. So you have to click no, and then you're getting a video of choice. And it got 160,000 views, right? And so this is something that creates this emotional connection, kind of adds in this personality without extra cost, because everybody could do this, right? Here's another example. We pick something that's remarkably boring. Title, Mr., Miss, Mrs., all this stuff, right? And you could say, so how can we make this better? Well, you don't have to have only 5 options, you can have a few more. Who would you like to be today? Maybe you'd like to be a lieutenant or princess, right? That's great. And in fact, they have 56 options altogether to choose from. And this is also easy to produce. Everybody could do this. And of course, when somebody ships you a product, when they ship a product to you, of course they'll have princess there, right? That's wonderful. How often do you get greeted as Princess Leia? That would be fantastic. I think that'd be very, very fitting, right? In many ways. So doing this is not that expensive. Or even these little animations, they can create this kind of nice emotional connections without being too difficult to produce, right? And many of you might have seen this, of course. I mean, this is become so famous. And I ask myself, how come did it become so famous? Well, because it really nicely addresses that little emotion that MailChimp was capturing in the animation. And here you want to write more, you want to rewrite and delete and write again, just to see how this character is going to respond, right? And this is so beautiful in so many ways, right? It just does everything that it needs, and it's not expensive to produce, but it's still memorable, right? And even if you need to make people think or wait, just make them wait. That's a nice little animation that actually stands for waiting. Or even something simpler than that. Think about like a checkbox or radio button. What could be more boring in the world than this? Well, this is probably the most boring thing in the world, but it doesn't have to be if you have a right idea. Right, so maybe instead of, when you have a newsletter box and somebody is asked to click, to unselect or select, maybe you should ask them to click 2 or 3 times. So actually introduce this kind of friction every now and again, right? And that's pretty easy to do as well, right? And of course it all is just a part of the story. Another thing is the visual component that you're adding to it. And so if we look into the websites, the reason why they all look similar or feel generic in a way is not because they're done by designers who don't know what to do, right? Of course they do. The problem is it's really, really difficult to stand out because you need to develop and design and find out what your own signature is. And even if we look into all these established beautiful sites like Atlassian and Intercom and Slack and Oscar, right? They all use custom illustrations, beautiful custom illustrations, but because they're all placed on the white background, kind of in a very similar way, they all still look quite similar in some way, because of course illustrations follow trends as well, right? So if we need to stand out, we kind of need to connect the different dots and the different parts of the experience. And it could be one thing that you do. It could be maybe moving letters, right? One little signature, at that point not so little, that you kind of use consistently everywhere. Which you use for animations, of course, but you specifically use maybe also in headings and here and there, right? Kind of one little thing that stands out. Maybe it could be a theme. Like maybe it could be a movie theme around your experience, right? Where you have this kind of thing that you know from the old movies kind of showing up in the background, and even as you navigate from one page to another, this one effect could be actually the entire kind of capturing the signature that you provide, that you have. It could also be something like a glitch, right? Maybe something along these lines where everything is a little bit off, or like distorted pixels, things like that. This is not difficult to produce either, as long as you know and you have your own signature. Or if you want, of course, to go something that's a bit more corporate, you could also have a little signature like this, maybe just a stencil, a pencil, and the kind of a form or shape that's introduced by that. That one thing could be enough. Or also tilting, like the one that we're using at Smashing. Just a little bit of tilting, maybe like 20 degrees, 30 degrees, a little bit of animation on tilting. That's again enough to make it to make the experience stand out a little bit more. I mean, you could of course go ahead and design this. Wow, I don't know how many of you know. Do you know how video text or teletext works? Oh, a lot of people. That's interesting. So, you know, you put in the numbers, punch in the numbers on a TV screen, and this is how you move from one page to another. Very much like, you know, things that some people call links, right? So when it comes to links, we just tap, but essentially this is the same experience of navigating. So you can use that remote at the top to navigate through punching numbers, or you could, of course, just tap on links. You know, so this is also another way of looking into these things. But maybe coming to slightly more practical sides of things, like knowing all of that, maybe we can also explore some of the established patterns that we know today and make these things a little bit better. Like, what about the good old hamburger icon? Well, reality is, of course, it's not just a hamburger icon. It's hamburger icons, right? It's a family of hamburgers at this point. And you have so many flavors. I'm so impressed. We have a veggie burger, we have a hot dog and a cheeseburger. You can actually choose your own adventure there as well. But when we actually studied off-canvas navigation, hamburger icon, you'll find out that it's really, really critical to study this wonderful device. You know, the physical, like the palm and the hand. Because many of the interactions that will be driven on the mobile phone are, of course, thumb-driven or index finger-driven. And because of that, of course, we end up with these areas which are more accessible. Some of them are more accessible, and some of them are less accessible. Now, we tend to actually hit those targets with different pressure, right? So it really depends on the posture as well. And we tend to use 6 established postures, right? Most of the time, we'll be actually using only one hand, right? One hand, first order and second order. The difference is only how far actually the hand sits on the back of the phone, right? And sometimes we'll be using both hands as well, where we actually either cradle or hold and touch, like we see on the top. No. Like when we cradle or when we actually hold and touch, here with the index finger and here with the thumb. And of course we'll be using landscape most of the time when we're playing video games or when we're actually watching a video. So it's very kind of predictable. And in many ways when we're typing, that's the only reason why we actually would be using this posture at the bottom, right? Pretty much. Now that's interesting because if we actually study how people access the mobile phones, we'll find out that one thing stands out very clearly. I mean, seriously, I don't know about this guy, right? But what's really interesting about this study is that not even a single person of all the people who tried to hit that icon actually hit the center of the icon. Not even one, which means that the input is always imprecise, so we have to be really, really careful. And Luke Wroblewski did this research, kind of looking at how many mistaps should we be expecting, or missed taps. And so with the average finger, index finger being 11 millimeters, as much as we go towards 11 millimeters, we can kind of avoid problems down the line altogether. But if you have really tiny tap targets, maybe 5 millimeters or so, you should be expecting quite a good number of people misstepping. And as we're using the phone, usually we are looking at the center of the phone, and the further away icons are from the center, the bigger the tap area should be and the bigger the icons should be. Because people tend to spend most of the time in the central area, they tend to tap, and most of the time in the central area, they tend to scroll most of the time in the central area. And so what it means for us as designers, that we need to be really careful of positioning the primary content, of course, in the middle. A secondary, like think about add to cart button, next button, any kind of shopping cart icon, things like that, tickets button, things like that, probably at the bottom of the screen and everything else at the top. So we kind of need to design around these priorities. And this is coming from Stephen Huber's research, who actually studied it a lot. And so one thing that you can use to make your experience a bit better is to use this little touch template that he built, touch template. And so as you can see, the circles and the edges are actually bigger compared to the center of the screen. And so whenever you're running, let's say, prototype and you have your first mock-up, this is what you can do. You place it on your screen, you use this little card to cover the interface, and you see if your target's actually big enough according to the touch template. That's really, really easy way to test. And this is the one we're using quite a lot. And if we look at the interfaces today, we'll find out that many interfaces are actually moving to this area where the menu is living at the bottom of the screen, and where the most important items are kind of exposed right there. So tickets, as you can see here at the bottom left, are exposed at the bottom left, or bottom right, instead of living at the top, right? And you also see many of these examples in very different contexts. Like, for example, this design from New York Times. That's a very bold design. Everything is white, except that one sentence, and the navigation actually again at the bottom, and everything happening from the bottom to the top, right? Instead of from top to the bottom, which is a very different way of actually designing an interface, right? And one of the interesting examples for very similar pattern is Ada, which was designed by Daniel Diggle Albion, which essentially is an application for tracking medical intake. And what they do is, kind of the entire design is, of course, circling around accessibility. And for that, you need to design for the thumb, of course. And so the first half of the screen is totally empty. Because why would you put something in there? It's totally inaccessible for the thumb, right? So the buttons, like the critical call to action button, lives at the bottom. You have the logo at the bottom. You have the side menu at the bottom. And as you use the site, essentially everything is happening within the reach of the thumb, right? And of course, it looks maybe a little bit awkward if you look at the breadcrumbs at the top. There's a little bit of a disconnect between what you see at the bottom or in the middle of the screen and at the top. But again, this is a bit more accessible for the thumb this way. Right? And so we'll see a lot of those things happening where maybe call to action buttons are kind of sticky to the bottom, and next button sticky to the bottom, and so on and so forth. And you can pull that off most of the time. However, if you have many items, this is not going to work well. So this is a posture from Iceland, postal service in Iceland. Don't ask me how I got to that site. Actually, I go to many sites every day, I think. And so we have all these navigation options, but then if you actually just push it all down to the bottom of the screen, it's really becoming hard to use. So for 3 to 5 items, that's just fine. But for more than that, it might be an issue, right? So when you start looking into the hamburger icon, a few things pop up. One of them is this traditional pattern that many of us will be used to, right? You have search in the right upper corner, and then you have navigation on the left. And as we were running a test on this, the one thing that was really surprising to me is that after 36 seconds of interaction, the person who was testing it on was actually shouting at this interface, trying to understand what the hell is happening, just because of that off-canvas pattern. And anything that jumps to you, something that's not quite right? Well, the reason was very simple. Like every single time the user would interact with the page, as you can see here, let me just go a little bit back, they click on the icon, and many people, and that would be at least 30% depending on the user base, will double tap again to close it, and they would end up in login. And why is it that? Well, not because we don't know better, because the users have no idea what they're doing, because very often you end up in this experience as you tap, and then you tap again and it closes, and as you tapped, very often you don't see what's underneath your finger because you have to lift it up. So it's more like an instinct. And so that person was thinking that they need to be logged in or signed up or have an account to actually use the navigation on the side. They didn't understand why it's happening, right? And so one thing that's really, really critical there is that whenever you open a navigation bar, right, just make sure that you can actually close that navigation bar at the same spot. You tap again, it should be the same spot where you actually close and open it. Because for many people out there, this will be the expectation, right? Another thing that's surprisingly weird and difficult is how to deal with accordions. Now, I love accordions. I really do. They're very, very important. And I studied accordions for 6 weeks. I mean, I dreamed in accordions. And you might think, what's the big deal? Come on, it's just an accordion, right? So you tap, it opens. The box opens. You tap again, it will be closed. Now, what's a big deal, right? Now, welcome to the website with the most accordions in the world. It has 152 accordions altogether, including the ones that do not work. But it's still accordions, technically, right? So essentially, accordions pretty much everywhere. For drop-downs, things are sliding in, things are sliding out, right? You go to tickets, things are sliding in, things are sliding out. Exhibitions, things are sliding in, things are sliding out. So you find a lot of inspiration for all kinds of accordions. Now this is one of them as well, right? So here we go to calendar, and as you can see here, you have like for every single gallery, for every single exhibition, they'll be highlighting, I mean not only the drop down, they'll be highlighting that exhibition. Although it doesn't work, no, it doesn't matter, it's still an accordion, not a big deal. And then also for tickets and so on and so forth. But there are different accordions. Now this is probably the biggest accordion in the world. Look at this button. Just look at this button. You open and you close, right? Here's another one, right? Where you also like huge area, the entire thing is an accordion. Beautiful, beautiful. Here's another one from Olympics, NBC Olympics. Now that might be the second largest accordion in the world. Just beautiful. I like big buttons. Do you like buttons? Okay, maybe just me. That's okay. But not every single accordion has to look exactly the same, right? Because if you go to Router, which is a Norwegian, I believe, three-planar, so they have an accordion, of course, for every single connection, but then within that connection, they have this little zigzag that indicates that there is something in there, right? This is, again, a nice way to collapse and then to expand if necessary. But if we look very closely, we'll find out that there are many, many, many very different kinds of accordions. And they don't work the same way. Here's one of them. You can open the card, but you can't close it. No, not here. No, and you're not going to close it. If you want to close it, you have to go and open the other one. Oh, here's another one where you actually click to open, and then this little arrow to close fades away and disappears. And if you have 8 items, you have to travel all the way to find how to close it. And sometimes this happens, right? When you open the navigation, you tap in the middle and nothing happens. Oh, that's painful. That's really painful. And then sometimes you actually click and something does happen. Then you think, okay, no, that's fine, right? So there's a lot of inconsistency when it comes even to things like accordions. So when you think about adding navigation in, if you have, let's say, these 5 options, there are so many questions you have to ask yourself. Like so many questions. Like, for example, you know, how do you design the category's title? What if somebody actually wants to go into football? When they click on sport, will you drive them to the category sport, or would you expand it as an accordion? Questionable questions. What about the icon? What icon do you choose to indicate expansion? There's a chevron with a circle, there's a plus with a circle, there's an arrow pointing to the right, arrow pointing to the bottom. There are so many options as well. And then comes the killer question. What if somebody opens sport and then they click on opinion? If all of them are sub-drop-downs, would you actually automatically collapse sport or not? You know, this is a very dramatic question that designers, you know, fight over in design rooms, spending days trying to find out, no, this should be like done this way. So all these questions kind of demand a lot of attention, right? And so when I look into it, there are many interesting patterns you can use there. One of them is, and this is again what The Guardian came up with, is to adding the section home, right within the sport kind of category. And that's brilliant because in many ways, if you want to go to football, let's say, or if you want to go to sport category, it's all about recovery experience. You tap on sport, you might be expecting that you go straight to the category, or you might be expecting that it will be an accordion, but in both cases, you're kind of catering for the user experience. That kind of works fairly well. And you might think, okay, now that makes sense, but does the choice of the icon matter? So if I ask you on this beautiful site from Ableton, and a company that produces DJ software in Berlin, if you clicked on plus here or here or here, right? What would you expect to happen? So who would expect maybe some sort of, again, an accordion happening? Okay, quite a good number of people. Who would expect some sort of like overlay, modal, pop-up? Few people. Who would expect some sort of adding to card, things like that? Maybe zooming in, zooming out. Hopefully not. Okay. Anything else? Nothing. In fact, it doesn't matter if you click on plus or not. Nothing happens. Nothing happens when you click on plus, and it's not because designers have no idea what they're doing, right? It's a very distant, like a very straight decision there. Now, why doesn't it happen? How often did it happen to you that somebody comes to you and tells you, well, we have this marketing campaign, we want to sell a bundle that contains 2 products. One of them is push, and the other one is Live 9 intro, right? For this price. Can you design a little thing that would actually display it? So you would say A plus B for that price, and here we go. And people click on it like mad people. Unbelievable. Everybody clicks on this freaking button. And if this button doesn't work, the one on the left, they will click on the one in the middle, right? And then they will click on the one on the right, just to make sure that it actually doesn't work, and it doesn't do anything. In the same way, you will see something similar happening in so many other cases. Like maybe even, here, or the same thing, exactly. This plus does nothing, but so many people click on it. Right? And so we kind of have to really run tests to find out what works and what doesn't work. Right? So this is quite interesting. Now another thing is how to deal with good old friends carousels. Right? Nobody likes carousels. Anybody likes carousels? Okay, 3 people. Anybody wants to go home? Yeah, more people. Okay. Well, carousels are beautiful. Look at this carousel. And the carousel. It's just incredibly beautiful. Now, most of the time when we design a carousel, we design it as a box with an arrow to the left, an arrow to the right, and then a few bubbles in between, right? And we should not be very surprised that this doesn't get a lot of click rate, because it's not very kind of enticing or exciting at all. Now, when I went to Istanbul, I decided to make it to my life journey to explore the world of carousels in Turkey. And I was impressed. I was deeply impressed. Because you end up with very different kinds of carousels. They would not use any dots. Instead, numbers. Many, 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 many numbers. And if you go through any kind of Turkish website, you'll find that there are many numbers. I mean, many, many, many numbers. And you might wonder, how would you translate it to a small, narrow screen? Well, dots, that's kind of, go ahead and explore. And it looks like every single website is actually designed almost by the same design agency, in a way. Like you find all these numbers everywhere. It's like a big, big deal. And this is probably the best example ever, right? Because here you end up with everything. At the bottom, you have a horizontal carousel. Here you have a vertical carousel. Carousel with a thumbnail. And the good old classic, this slider. Right? So all those carousels at once. And we don't have to design carousels this way. They can be very different. Here's a carousel. Essentially, this is a bookshelf on a Russian website which actually highlights the different books that they from classic to Russian literature. And as you move from one to another, you're like navigating through the shelf. Now, the tilting of the wording is difficult, of course, to read. So it could have some labels maybe at the bottom. But still, this is a carousel, and it's a very impactful one. Right? Another way of designing a better carousel would be maybe to do something that's a bit more impactful, like this. Right? Where you have this full width layout, where you have full background image, and then you have a circular carousel. It doesn't have to be just a rectangle with a few dots in between. It could be a bit more interesting. In the same way, it might be a good idea to add labels to this circle. So as you have those circles, people can actually navigate or drive or jump to specific parts of interaction. All right, within this carousel. And you can have different shapes as well. Nobody's really stopping you from doing something that's a bit more interesting. Maybe with some bouncy animations and effects that will actually make the experience really much better, right? So even when it comes to carousels, we can do things a little bit better. And if you do need to make something that's a bit more predictable, like again in a corporate setting, you can still add a little bit more interest to it by replacing every dot with something that's actually more informative, like let's say a thumbnail on the label of what you're representing there, right? That's not that complicated to produce either. But if we look into like a slightly more complicated world and diving into things like configurators, which combine everything that I talked about in the beginning, you'll find out that that can be done really, really better, really, really well. This is a configurator, but probably not one of the best ones. So as you move on through the configurator, you might be willing to commit to, I don't know, paying a couple of thousands of euros or so, in that case. You go for step 1. And then you go to the next step, and then you go to step 2, and you add step construction, and then you select the drop down, and then you check your checkboxes, and then you select the radio button, and then you move to the next one, right? This is not the most exciting experience ever, but the worst part is you click on next, and you're still at step 2, right? And at this point, this is when people abandon. This is when they drop out. This is not exciting, and it's not going to convert well. Here's another configurator, which is interesting. Do you understand how this works? Now that's a configurator, right? You are about to configure your own date. Go for it, right? You know when you have to type in 1956, type in 1900 plus 50 plus 6 plus September 27. That's easy. And of course, you wouldn't use it on a, on a regular, I don't know, like hotel date picker website, a hotel website with a date picker. But this was designed specifically for a library in New York and on a larger dashboard. So of course, it's much faster to type in dates this way rather than the previous way, like the good old day with a keyboard. Oh, this is the favorite configurator I've ever seen in my life. You want to buy a boat because why not? Right? You want to buy a boat, and so you end up on this beautiful site, Sesame Marine, and the video, and the screen is too good to see the quality of that video, and you really dive in, and then you see, yep, that's the moment I'm going to buy. And you click on Build My Boat, and you choose a model. This is how it usually works. You get a flasher-like preloader. Man, it's getting sensitive here. And then you get half a carousel. They don't give you the full carousel. They give you half a carousel with 2 hamburger icons on the top, right, for the price of one, I guess. And then you try to figure out what this is, and you click around, and then you write, I know. There is a hide summary checkbox. I click on it. Yes, and then it disappears. And then it appears again, right? And you're about to give somebody 1 million euros or so, and they're kind of forcing you to go for this configuration where you kind of add radio buttons and checkboxes. And it's not very exciting. Another really interesting example is, of course, this one. Now, imagine a situation where you're building, this is a financial plan, mortgage calculator, I think. And so at this point, they're asking you a couple of questions. One of them is, that clicker doesn't seem to be working here. Strange. In this case, do you have children? And I'm wondering, because at some point there must be a designer sitting somewhere thinking, in front of Photoshop or Sketch, like what all the fancy people do, right? Sitting and thinking, how many children do you have? Slider, right? And there must be a designer somewhere thinking that must be a good idea. And the best part about Slider is it has a minimum value and a maximum value, right? And then the minimum is quite obvious. I don't think it's going to be -1 or so. But you have a maximum value. You can't make it like 99 probably, because then it would be really hard to use that slider, right? So it may be 5, 6 or so. But then if you have more, what do you do? Well, there is a solution, of course. You click on the pencil icon, then that 0 becomes an input field. You can type in 7, let's say. The problem is, somebody decided to set the maximum value to 5. So if you type in 7, it will say, 5, right? Now that's nice, right? And you see this wonderful configurators and you think, yeah, that's just beautiful. And if we look into most of them, they'll be quite, not boring, but just not very exciting, not exciting enough, right? And so this is the one from Ferrari for a few years ago. And of course, every single car configurator, especially for Ferrari, needs a night view because, you wouldn't drive Ferrari during the day. That's just ridiculous. Why would you? So you need a night view. And then because you probably have if you're buying a Ferrari, you probably have a Ferrari already, maybe in your garage. So what you can do then is to compare the Ferrari you have in your garage with the Ferrari that you're about to buy. So essentially you can compare 2 Ferraris at the same time, right? And see how well they fit, right? But then, and that's really surprising, you go further down to configure your own Ferrari, and what you're getting is this. That's not very exciting. So this could be done a bit better because you could do this. That's a little bit better. Like show that Ferrari all the way in 3D, and if you want to change your wheels, you just swipe left and you swipe right, and you actually click on all the buttons, and you have this immersive experience where you do a lot of stuff. But that would be a little bit difficult to produce. But you still can do this. One of the main things, or one of the main decisions that were driven that are often driven by car configurators is how much space can you dedicate to the product, right? Ideally, you want to dedicate the entire space to the product. So give it 100% and figure out a way how to add navigation if you need to, how to add some elements of interactive elements to play with that product, to really engage with people. Right? And so one easy way out would be to add these bubbles. Here's a nice concept of how you can make this work on Renault. Right? Well, it might be really awkward to have too many bubbles just because you might have too many options to choose from. So instead of having all the bubbles all the time, you break it down into parts. So you might have features and interior buttons, as you see at the bottom. Click on features, you see everything related to features. You click on one of them, you might be dragged into the point of interest. Then it's switched to interior, and it's kind of the same thing on interior, right? And every time you have some 3D experience, that might actually really, really help you. Like this is quite impactful and quite noticeable here, right? Like for the Hasselblad, like this animation alone is, wow, quite impactful, right? But and not everybody can pull that off, but these bubbles, everybody can pull off. The only problem is, if you have a lot of them, you have very specific details for the product, one important thing there would be, or to try out at least, would be to space out those bubbles. Because otherwise, imagine if you wanted to change the character here, right? Change the glasses or eyes and all, and you put them right on the character, it might be very, very difficult to see anything. And it's not really the most exciting experience, right? So, but you can do a lot of things in a very simple way. Like, for example, here, when it comes to bicycles, just let people click on the point of interest, not necessarily on the bubble, but on the area, and then zoom in, and then gray out everything else. That's a simple thing you'll find on many sites, actually. Especially the ones that have the luxury of adding things like, color or so on a really large patch areas. Here, it's really easy because you can tap on the area and then adjust the color right away. But the most important thing there, of course, is performance, right? Because here, on the side of Shoes of Prey, well, you can adjust your shoes, right? You can customize the shoes, but then it takes up to 20 seconds or 25 seconds for the render to appear. So this will take a while, and if it happens like 2 times, then there is no way people are going to use your configurator. So before you even start thinking about designing one, it's a good idea to think twice about how you would actually build it, so it's actually resilient. And one simple way of doing that would be to break it apart, not necessarily displaying the full render, but instead using an SVG here with all the different elements loaded separately. And so whenever you make a change, you kind of don't see the 3D render, just because it would take too much time to render. But instead, you have real-time feedback or real-time instant visual of what it's going to look like, just because there are many SVGs in the back, right? And also, you can go a little bit overboard and make this experience just a bit more personal, like the thing that I was talking about in the beginning, right? Well, it's really remarkable, like here on Helix matrices, the first thing they ask is, what is your name? How is it relevant for the, for the mattress that I'm building? Probably not so much, but the reason why they do it is because in the end, after you answer a few questions, maybe a few too many, right? You end up in this really wonderful form where they show you that product and with your names on it. That's such a humane, personal experience, which is much better than any configurator out there, just because you really feel like this is yours at this point. And you can, of course, do crazy things like this. I mean, I'm not quite sure what it exists, but apparently you can extend your tattoo on the hand onto a knife, because why not, right? And then you end up with this really wow effect 3D experience. I didn't think that knives are so cool or important or so, but apparently it's a thing, and then you have this 3D minority kind of thing where you have to move around just to make sure that the navigation is displayed. That's maybe just a little bit too much. Just a little bit, right? And finally, one more thing I want to talk about today, just to wrap up, is the notion of something that actually came up in the conference quite a lot. That's the notion of respect in our interfaces. Because if I looked around, and I did a lot of research in this area for the last 4 months, it was remarkable to see how much we suffer on the web these days. Now, this tweet by Nicholas Sagas actually nicely reflects what's happening, right? You end up going to the site, and what you do instead, you're fighting all these pop-ups that actually are thrown at your face, right? That's quite disrespectful, I would say. Even better, sometimes even simple things. I'm not talking about like big corporations or so. You want to buy a cinema ticket. You get pop-up number 1, you get pop-up number 2, you click it away, because I don't want to buy a ticket, so I don't need a pop-up. You click on the close button, it opens a new tab. Thank you very much, that's very friendly. And then you go back again, try to close it again, and it opens again in a new tab. So you end up with 4 pop-ups just by entering the site, right? And then if you do decide to buy the ticket after all, you end up with this Please check the film date session. The information shown above is the one you have selected for a movie ticket, since you will not be able to make changes or refunds when the purchase is finished, right? How disrespectful is that, right? Somebody wants to give you the money, and this is what you end up with, right? Here's another one, another configurator. I'm really into configurators today. I mean, if you don't like insects, I highly encourage you to close your eyes now. This is not, especially also the people watching in the stream, this is not going to be nice, but there must be designers somewhere designing this, right? So this is a product that allows you to build, to kill bugs, right? And I'm almost wondering, a designer must think, let's add a little bit of red here, or green over here, or even better, when you start a configurator, let's have some fun, right? Make them stop, sounds like a nice button. Oh, let's have a slider with a bug on it. How often do you see a slider with a freaking bug on it, right? And then you go to the next step, and then you continue to select where your insects actually have invaded, right? And then you get the winner. The problem is they have only one product to sell. But that's a nice configurator to entice you into this. Here's another beautiful example. Many of you, of course, know Ryanair, and they redesigned, and it looks beautiful now, but I don't forget. I'm like an elephant. I never forget. Because I never forget that moment whenever you book a flight with Ryanair, the insurance was added in for you automatically unless you opt out. But to opt out, you need to know how to opt out, because to opt out, you need to find Don't Insure Me, conveniently located between Finland and Denmark. Right? It's great for somebody who is from Finland, it's great for somebody who is from Denmark, not so much from everybody else, right? That's just not fair. And then somebody said, no. We can do better. We can do better. What if we add this little bubble in the subject line for emails, so somebody opens an email and then it's marked as read and then they don't get back. If we trick them into thinking that the message hasn't been opened yet, they might come back. How devil is that? And then you go and so to Instagram, we can do better. We can do better. What if we Photoshop in a hair on the image, so people think that they have a hair on the font and they start clicking accidentally? And yes, they started clicking, and then somebody said, no. We can do better. We can do much better. What if we add some dirt on a banner somewhere? Like, will people click? And of course they do. And then somebody said, no, we need to take it to the next level. Like all the way. Push notification. My medic would like to send you notifications. Do you like to allow it? Or no, I do not want to stay alive. Oh, how friendly that is. This is the best ever. And then it gets even better at times. Like, want to stay on top of all the you actually care about. Sign up now. Obviously, I'm boring. One of them being like the primary button, the other is being secondary button. And this is everywhere. And so no wonder that especially after things like this happen, when YouTube was serving ads with CPU draining cryptocurrency miners, I mean, I have no problem, of course, just providing all my CPU for YouTube to do Bitcoin mining for me. I don't mind at all. I want to make other people happy, right? Well, don't wonder that we started fighting back with things like ad blockers and other things. And what's really surprising is that the user behavior in 2019 has changed so dramatically. It's like every time we encourage something, we block. Like pop-ups and modals, block. Push notifications, block. Chat window pop-ups floating at the bottom, block most of the time. Download the app bars at the top, block. Importing context, would you like to sync your LinkedIn context? Block. Video autoplay, no freaking way, block. Permission requests, would you like to have access to my data, where I am and so on? Block. GDPR, okay. Whatever, GDPR, I have nothing to hide, right? No problem there. And then all the other things, advertising, onboarding tutorials, the best part. You design these beautiful cards. Swipe left and swipe right, and it's fancy animation and all of that. And the only thing that people want is skip, right? Nobody wants to see those onboarding tutorials. Access to camera, phones, location, newsletters, this is the best part. Imagine you're at the airport, somebody asks you to sign in with Facebook or Instagram or email to get Wi-Fi. Well, what do most people do? They sign in with email because they don't want to give them access to your personal space, right? And nobody actually, by the way, likes the fact that you start Googling something, and then 2 minutes later it starts showing up on Facebook and Instagram and everywhere else, right? That's very frustrating because you feel like being tracked, right? And so when it comes to those emails, that's remarkable because we learned to master and to fight back. We're so good at it. So of course we'll sign in with an email, but not the good email. No, we're going to give them that other email that we're using where all kind of crappy emails live and email subscriptions and weird accounts we don't need and all that stuff, right? And so if you're working at the airport, I would love to see that database. That's so good, must be so creative. People come up with all kind of imaginary friends. I'm pretty sure about that. So the same goes for other things. Capture, well, not much we can do there. And I think that there's this notion of I have nothing to hide, which is just inherently wrong. Of course, I don't have anything to hide, but it's not about that at all. It's about me having a conversation with somebody else without Facebook or anybody else listening. Now, that's not about hiding. It's about me communicating something very personal to somebody who I care about. That's a slightly different way of looking into that. So there are kind of a couple of things to learn there as well, right? So just to wrap up, I want to show you just one more thing. So we talk a lot about different things and what's happening on the web and all that design and all that. I think that's really important is it doesn't matter what we do. In the end, maybe some of our choices are not as important as some others. So I want to leave you with this video alone. Because in the end, this is the stuff that matters most, not
you
the
might
shape
wonder
of the button,
how blind people deal
corners.
with everyday challenges. Well, normally the answer is simple. We're not that different from you. We play music. We go to school. We go to work. You get the picture. But sometimes the simplest things can be difficult, and we need a pair of eyes.
Connect to first available helper.
That's where you come in.
Establishing video connection.
Through your smartphone, Be My Eyes connects the blind with sighted people through a live video connection. Simply choose if you need help or want to help by the click of a button.
That's a nice picture of you and your family, Caroline. Is it for a present? Yes, it's a photo from my parents.
You can help just by installing the Be My Eyes app.
Print image.
And we'll notify you when someone needs your help. And if you're in the middle of something, don't worry. Someone else will step in. So, would you care to be my eyes?
The shape of the button and the border radius there and the color of the background, they don't matter so much at all, because the decision that's been made by some designer at some point actually makes a difference in the world, so that's what matters. And finally, just to brighten up the spirits, here's another one, the story of my life. You can do whatever you like with your interface design. You will never get it perfect, and you will never get it just right. So welcome to my world. I have to live through this every single day. What a wonderful video. And with this in mind, I have cats, and I have a few books downstairs, and meow, and thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you. Brilliant, fantastic ending speech there.
Thank you.
getting carried away. I'm just trying to unlock my phone to get to the final Slido of the conference. Except for some reason it doesn't recognise my fingerprint when I need it to. Right, okay, so I'm going to fire away some questions at you. We're going to do this quite quickly.
Sure, of course.
The top question is, will the slides be available?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. Where can we find those?
I can tweet the link, so everybody has it. It's just, every single Friday or so I'm going through a lot of websites. And so I just collect them. It's probably a collection of like 3-4 years of going through every single Friday. So I can just post them.
Fab. Look forward to it. Do you think that the reduced number of websites with personality has anything to do with the death of Macromedia or Adobe Flash?
I don't know. I'm not sad enough to state it, and I think that maybe there are a few people like this in the room, but I miss Flash. Okay, not the technology, the creativity behind that was actually possible, all the stuff that we were doing with Flash. Because at this point, we have all the wonderful technologies, but we still end up creating things because we're all on a tight budget, on a tight schedule, and also because there's an incredible complexity in everything that we're doing, right? Like thinking about responsive, performance, accessibility, just really, really difficult to get things right. And so it was a bit easier back then, I think.
Yeah, controversial, but I agree with your sentiment on that.
Nobody misses Flash. Silverlight? Nobody, I don't miss Silverlight. So.
How do you possibly find all of these sites, and how do you manage to keep all of the screen recordings?
Yeah, so I don't trust the websites to exist after, maybe a few weeks after I find them. So I always record videos. It takes a lot of time. And I was recording many of them in high resolution back then, like 3-4 years ago. And they were only 1080p. And then they look pretty bad on screens like this. So I ended up recording in 4K. So I'm running out of space all the time. But the thing is, whenever I find something interesting, I always record, because I don't trust that they will remain. And very often, whenever I go to a new city, I pick up a theme, a topic, and then I go and explore. Like when I was in Turkey, I just really was curious about newspapers in Turkey. And then you go to all the newspapers, like top 20, and you think, oh my God. Wow, that's quite impressive. And then go, medical insurance, Netherlands. And you'll find some interesting websites there as well. And then what we do is, we take those sites when I find something like things that I feel are not working well, then we create a little usability lab, or maybe just bring in people in usability test, and then we run recordings on how people use them, right? And so this is something I can use then in my consultancy work.
I think it's also, once you've got so many of those, how do you archive them? How do you then find the right example again?
I have five backups in different parts of the world because I don't trust the internet. No, I trust the internet. I have 2 backups in different cloud storage services, but also 3 of them are distributed everywhere in the world, just in case.
Someone is asking if there's a way that we can actually access all of those.
So if, for Smashing members, have access to PDFs, videos are at this point approximately, I think, 270 gigabyte. So I don't know. I probably would need a bit of time to upload. And I need to collect them. They all because I exchanged or replaced 3 laptops at this point. So I'm wondering where they all live. Probably somewhere, yeah. But they're not really categorized except like in the slides, so. And I also run workshops with more examples like that. Anybody who attended the workshop will know.
Right, we've got 2 more, and then I think we're going to have to rein it in on the questions. Do you think too many companies just look at the big players like Facebook do on the level of website design and development?
Yeah, I think every time I work in e-commerce, I feel like every single conversation starts with the same thing over and over. Why don't we do what Amazon does? Like over and over, it's kind of the same conversation happening. And I think that we need to think about priorities, we need to think about the problems that every company is solving. So Amazon is very different from everybody else, just because they have a user base and their goal is to use the user base. While every other small retailer has to fight for every single customer. They don't have a luxury of having a huge base that they can actually do whatever with, right? The same goes for all the big companies that have the resources to test and improve and refine and adjust. And again, companies like Facebook and others that are doing an incredible job, often at least, and Airbnb and all the others, they have the resources and the time to make the interface really, really good. And at the same time, they're solving their problem with their solutions. that work best for them, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for anybody else. And so whenever we, see a pattern somewhere, and I like thinking about patterns, but whenever when we see a pattern, we think about applying it. Well, we always see them as a building block, right? And so we need to test it first in usability test and on a real project. You can't just take something blindly and call it a day.
Okay, and the last one. Do you know what MailChimp do with all the data they have, or do you care?
Frankly, I don't know, but actually knowing the people behind it, knowing like Aaron Walter and all the other people that I've been working with in the past and just talked to, I trust people there. That's from my side. Maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should, I don't know. But I know the people and I trust them. Because in the end, it's all the people behind the products. So I don't trust products where I don't know people working on those products.
Well, that's good enough for me.
Oh, excellent.
Cool. Please put your hands together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's been wonderful. Thank you.